Okay. Hi, everybody. Take two. Hi, everybody. It's been a long time since I made a video or posted anything on social media or any platform. Um, but I'm excited to start making content again and telling some stories. Just got off the phone with Apple customer service. Thank you, Apple customer service. Your customer service is so much better than your technology these days. Love it. But yeah, kudos to the person who helped me. You'll be getting 5 stars on that survey. But anyway, taking a couple classes this term. It's summertime, 2025, Portland, Oregon. And I'm going to be graduating in March 2026 with my digital communication arts degree. I'm going to be taking a break during the fall term to fly to Nepal for 2 months, where I'll be studying the intersections of environmental biodiversity in Buddhist culture. I'm very excited, putting those efforts towards conservation, science awareness, science communication, research communication, all things that we need in our society to understand our world better and understand ourselves better. But first I gotta graduate. Yeah. And yeah, so media law is cool. It's a lot of reading. I took some notes, a lot of notes, read a bunch of case studies and some briefs this week. It's just week 1, you God. And I'm one of those people that I need information in different formats, like multiple different formats, to look at it from all the different like angles and experience it in different ways, for the knowledge to really sink in. So because I have ADHD, and also I love making podcasts, I decided to take all of my notes for media law and constitutional framework, and I turned it into a podcast. And I formatted this podcast specifically to be read by an AI voice, which is Siri. I'm using the Siri voice on the desktop computer I got. Just came prepackaged, but you still have to write your scripts and words to be accessible to machines, because they look at and hear things differently than we do. Interesting perspective when you're thinking about media, for sure. Comparing data versus actual information. Like, what is this? Data to a machine is something very, very different than what data is to a human. But anyway, if you want to learn the tips and tricks that I used to format this podcast specifically for automation, having someone else read it to you, or maybe record it, and you can make your automated AI faceless money making channel, like is so popular these days. I'm not going to sell you a course. I just want to teach you about media law at the same time as I'm learning about it, because having a picture, a frame of me working helps me actually work. So that's what I'll be doing. I'll be looking at myself in the camera like a narcissist and working, while my podcast review of my notes for this week plays in the background. It's all original content. It's all content based on open source common law. So you can go look up these cases for yourself, at like justia.org or Supreme Court like archives and stuff like that, and just read them. Or you can listen to this podcast at the same time I do and get all of this beautiful synthesized knowledge read to you by an awesome robotic friend that lives inside my computer. And let me know what you think in the comments below. By the way, this is not a live stream. This is a pre-recorded video. It's June 27th, 2025. and I officially have 0 followers on this channel. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes after I post this video and share it with maybe my family and friends. And my goal for this channel, I think, will be to post a video every day until I graduate, because I honestly need someone to hold me accountable to doing my schoolwork every day. I will procrastinate unless I can see myself doing it, which is what this is for. Anyway, without further ado, Siri number 4 gives you
Media Law and Constitutional Framework Analysis. Contemporary media law context. The 9 cases you selected form a constitutional law foundation that directly impact.
All right, well, that's actually a little bit embarrassing, because that was the notes. The notes that I assembled to write the script, and they're in the same document. But I'm gonna go ahead and open a new document now, so there's no confusion. Perfect example of data versus information, what it means to a podcast, what it means to a robot versus what it means to me. Okay. Now let's try this again. Siri number 4, bringing you
Number Media Law Constitutional Framework. 9 cases that shape how we regulate speech. Podcast script. Opening. Welcome to Constitutional Foundations, where we explore the Supreme Court cases that shape how America regulates media and speech. I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into 9 landmark cases that might not seem like media law at first glance, but actually form the constitutional backbone of how courts approach everything from social media regulation to broadcast licensing. Think of these cases as the invisible infrastructure underlying every media law decision. They're the constitutional DNA that determines whether the government can regulate speech, who gets to challenge those regulations, and how much deference courts give to federal agencies when they make the rules. So grab your coffee and let's explore how cases about healthcare, immigration, and student loans actually determine the future of free speech in America. Case 1, Marbury versus Madison, the Foundation Stone. Our journey begins in 1803 with Marbury versus Madison, the case that literally created the power of judicial review. Now, you might be thinking, what does this musty old case about a justice of the peace have to do with media law? Everything, actually. Here's the story. John Adams, in his final hours as president, tried to pack the courts with his political allies. William Marbury was supposed to get a commission as a justice of the peace, but the new Secretary of State, James Madison, refused to deliver it. Marbury sued, asking the Supreme Court to order Madison to hand over his commission. Chief Justice John Marshall faced a brilliant constitutional dilemma. If he ordered Madison to deliver the commission, Madison would probably ignore him, showing the court was powerless. If he sided with Madison, it would look like the court was just doing politics. Marshall's solution was genius. He said Marbury had a right to his commission, but the Supreme Court didn't have the power to order its delivery, because the law giving the court that power was itself unconstitutional. In one move, Marshall established that courts are the final arbiters of what the Constitution means. The legal framework analysis, Marshall used what we call a formalist approach. He looked at the plain text of the Constitution and applied structural reasoning about how government should work. The legal theory here is constitutional supremacy. When Congress passes a law that conflicts with the Constitution wins, and courts have the duty to say so. Why this matters for media law. Every time a court strikes down a speech restriction, every time someone challenges a social media regulation, every time the Supreme Court says the government has gone too far in regulating expression, that power traces directly back to Marbury versus Madison. This case established that courts, not politicians, get the final word on constitutional limits. Case 2, Gonzalez versus Reich. When federal power meets local choices. Fast forward to 2005. Angel Reich and Diane Monson were California residents, using medical marijuana legally under state law. But federal drug enforcement agents raided Monson's home and destroyed her 6 cannabis plants. The question, can the federal government prohibit local, non-commercial medical marijuana when state law allows it. The Supreme Court said yes, 6-3. Justice Stevens, writing for the majority, relied heavily on a 1942 case called Wickard versus Filburn, where the court said a farmer growing wheat for his own use still affected interstate commerce because, in the aggregate, such individual choices impact national markets. The legal framework, the court applied what's called rational basis review with substantial deference to Congress. They looked at whether Congress could rationally conclude that local medical marijuana use, when aggregated across the country, would undermine federal drug policy. The legal theory is the comprehensive regulatory scheme doctrine. When Congress creates a complete system of regulation, courts won't let individuals pick and choose which parts to follow. Media law connection. This case matters enormously for media regulation. It establishes that even purely local speech activities can be subject to federal regulation if they're part of a larger pattern that affects interstate commerce. Think about local bloggers, community podcasters, or regional news sites. Under Reich logic, if their collective impact affects interstate information markets, federal regulation could apply. Case 3, National Federation of Independent Business versus Sibelius, the Affordable Care Act showdown. 2012 brought us the constitutional challenge to Obamacare's individual mandate. The question wasn't just about healthcare. It was about the fundamental limits of federal power. Chief Justice Roberts faced enormous pressure. Conservative legal circles expected him to strike down President Obama's signature achievement. Progressive voices warned that doing so would politicize the court. Roberts found a narrow path through the constitutional minefield. He said the Commerce Clause couldn't justify forcing people to buy insurance. Regulating economic activity is one thing, but forcing people to become economically active is another. However, Roberts saved the mandate by calling it a tax. Congress clearly has the power to tax, and if people choose not to buy insurance, they pay more in taxes. The legal framework. Roberts used constitutional avoidance. When possible, interpret laws to avoid constitutional problems. He applied a formalist approach to the Commerce Clause, but a functional approach to the tax power. The legal theories here include the activity versus inactivity distinction and the anti-commandeering principle. Media implications. This case sets crucial limits on federal power to compel speech. The government can't force you to say something just because your silence affects interstate commerce, but it might be able to tax your silence or create tax incentives for speech. Think net neutrality, content moderation requirements, or platform speech obligations. The activity versus inactivity distinction from Sibelius could determine what's constitutionally permissible. Case 4, Immigration Naturalization Service versus Chadha. The legislative veto dies. 1983 gave us a case that killed an entire category of congressional power. Jagdish Chadha was a Kenyan student whose visa expired. An immigration judge suspended his deportation, but the House of Representatives vetoed that decision with a simple resolution. The Supreme Court said this legislative veto violated the Constitution. When Congress acts with the force of law, it must follow the Constitution's requirements. Both houses must pass legislation, and it must be presented to the president for signature or veto. The legal framework. The court applied strict formalist separation of powers analysis. Chief Justice Berger emphasized that the Constitution's procedural requirements aren't just bureaucratic formalities. They're substantive protections. The legal theory is constitutional proceduralism. How government acts is just as important as what it does. Media law significance. Legislative vetoes were common in media regulation. Congress would delegate broad authority to the Federal Communications Commission, then reserve the right to veto specific rules. Chadha ended that practice. Now, if Congress wants to change FCC rules, it must pass new legislation through both houses and present it to the president. This makes media regulation more stable but less responsive to political pressure. Case 5, Chevron versus Natural Resources Defense Council. The birth of agency deference. 1984 brought us arguably the most important administrative law case in American history. The Environmental Protection Agency wanted to treat multiple pollution sources at a single industrial plant as if they were inside a regulatory bubble. Environmental groups challenged this interpretation of the Clean Air Act. Justice Stevens, writing for a unanimous court, created what became known as Chevron deference. When Congress writes an ambiguous law and delegates implementation to an agency, courts should defer to the agency's reasonable interpretation. The two-step Chevron analysis. Step 1. Is congressional intent clear? If yes, that controls. If no, move to step 2. Is the agency's interpretation reasonable? If yes, courts defer to the agency. The legal framework. This represents an institutional competence approach. Agencies have technical expertise that courts lack, and agencies are accountable to democratically elected presidents. The legal theory emphasizes democratic accountability through executive control and judicial restraint in policy matters. Media law impact. Chevron deference has been crucial for media regulation. When the FCC interprets ambiguous communications laws, courts typically defer to the agency's expertise. This affects everything from broadcast content rules to internet privacy regulations. However, recent Supreme Court cases suggest Chevron deference may be weakening, which should give courts more power to second-guess agency interpretations of media laws. Case 6, California versus Texas. Standing and the unenforceable mandate. 2021 brought us a sequel to the Obamacare case. After Republicans zeroed out the individual mandate penalty in 2017, Texas and other states sued, claiming the now unenforceable mandate was unconstitutional and that this somehow invalidated the entire Affordable Care Act. Justice Breyer, writing for a 7-2 majority, said the states lacked standing to sue. Without a penalty, the mandate causes no concrete injury. You can't sue over a law that doesn't actually affect you. The legal framework. The court applied strict Article 3 standing doctrine, requiring concrete and particularized injury. The legal theory emphasizes separation of powers through standing limits. Courts decide cases, not abstract policy disputes. Media law relevance. This case reinforces that policy disagreements don't create constitutional cases. Media companies, advocacy groups, or states that simply dislike federal communications policies can't necessarily challenge them in court. They need to show concrete, traceable injury from specific government actions. Case 7, TransUnion versus Ramirez, concrete injury in the digital age. 2021 also brought us TransUnion versus Ramirez, a case about whether statutory violations automatically create standing to sue. TransUnion, a credit reporting company, maintained files suggesting some consumers might be terrorists or drug dealers. Most of these consumers never saw the reports, but they sued anyway. Justice Kavanaugh, writing for the majority, said Article 3 requires concrete injury, not just statutory violations. Historical practice and traditional common law provide guidance for what injuries are sufficiently concrete for federal court jurisdiction. The legal framework. The court used historical constitutional interpretation, looking to tort law traditions and past court practices. The legal theory emphasizes individual concrete rights versus abstract public enforcement authority. Media law connection. This case is huge for digital media law. Think about privacy violations, data breaches, or online harassment where harm might be intangible or speculative. TransUnion suggests that not every privacy law violation creates federal court jurisdiction. Plaintiffs need to show concrete harm, not just that a law was broken. Case 8, Biden versus Nebraska, the major questions doctrine. 2023 brought the student loan forgiveness case that established clear limits on agency power. The Biden administration tried to cancel over $400 billion in student debt using the HEROES Act, a post-9/11 law designed for emergencies affecting student borrowers. Chief Justice Roberts, writing for a 6-3 majority, said this exceeded agency authority. The HEROES Act allows modifications to student loan programs, but canceling nearly $500 billion in debt isn't a modification. It's a complete transformation. The major questions doctrine. When agencies claim authority over issues of vast economic and political significance, they need clear congressional authorization. Courts won't assume Congress intended to delegate such enormous power through vague or general language. The legal framework. The court applied the major questions doctrine with strict textual limits. The legal theories include democratic accountability for major policy decisions and separation of powers through clear statement rules. Media law implications. This case could dramatically limit federal agencies' power to create new media regulations. Want to regulate social media algorithms, create new internet privacy rules, restrict online political advertising. Under Biden versus Nebraska, agencies might need explicit congressional authorization for any economically or politically significant media regulation. Case 9, FDA versus Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine. Standing and regulatory disagreement. Our final case from 2024 involves pro-life doctors challenging FDA's relaxed restrictions on mifepristone, an abortion medication. The doctors argued that easier access to the drug might lead to more emergency complications, forcing them to provide treatment that violates their conscience. Justice Kavanaugh, writing for a unanimous court, said the doctors lacked standing. Federal conscience laws protect doctors from being forced to perform procedures that violate their beliefs. Without concrete injury, policy disagreements don't create federal court cases. The legal framework, the court applied strict Article 3 requirements with rigorous causation analysis. The legal theory prevents ideological standing while protecting conscience rights through other legal mechanisms. Media law significance. This case reinforces that moral or ideological objections to how government regulates others don't create standing to sue. Media activists, content creators, or advocacy groups can't necessarily challenge regulations they philosophically oppose. They need to show direct, concrete injury from government action. Bringing it all together, what this means for modern media law. These 9 cases create a constitutional framework that shapes every aspect of contemporary media regulation. From Marbury, we get judicial review, the power of courts to strike down unconstitutional speech restrictions. From Reich, we learn that local speech activities can be subject to federal regulation if they collectively affect interstate commerce. From Sibelius, we understand limits on government power to compel speech, but possibilities for tax-based incentives. From Chadha, we see that Congress can't use legislative vetoes to micromanage agency media regulations. From Chevron, we get agency deference for technical interpretations of communications laws, though this may be changing. From California versus Texas, an FDA alliance, we learn that policy disagreements don't create constitutional cases. Concrete injury is required. From TransUnion, we understand that not every legal violation creates federal court jurisdiction in our digital age. From Biden versus Nebraska, we see major new limits on agency power to create economically or politically significant regulations without clear congressional authorization. The contemporary media landscape. This framework suggests several key principles for modern media law. First, prior restraints on speech face the highest constitutional scrutiny, thanks to Marbury's establishment of judicial review. Second, federal regulation of digital platforms and social media companies is likely constitutional under Reich's broad commerce power. But major new regulatory programs might face major questions doctrine challenges under Biden versus Nebraska. Third, challenges to media regulations must show concrete, particularized injury. General policy objections aren't enough under the standing cases. Fourth, agencies like the FCC get deference for technical interpretations under Chevron, but courts may be more skeptical of broad policy claims. Looking forward, the constitutional landscape for media law is shifting. The major questions doctrine could significantly limit new federal media regulations. Standing requirements prevent many ideological challenges to existing rules, and the potential weakening of Chevron deference might give courts more power to scrutinize agency interpretations. For media lawyers, content creators, platform companies, and digital rights advocates, understanding this constitutional foundation is essential. These cases determine not just what government can regulate, but who can challenge those regulations and how courts will review them. The future of free speech, digital privacy, platform regulation, and media policy all depend on the constitutional principles established in these 9 landmark cases. Closing. That's our deep dive into the constitutional foundations of media law. 9 cases spanning over 2 centuries. From John Marshall's brilliant constitutional chess move in Marbury versus Madison to the modern standing requirements that determine who can challenge digital age regulations. These cases remind us that constitutional law isn't just abstract theory. It's the practical framework that determines how government can regulate speech, who gets to challenge those regulations, and what evidence courts require to intervene. Next time you see a First Amendment case, a social media regulation challenge, or a fight over platform content policies, remember these foundational principles. The constitutional DNA established in these cases continues to shape how America balances free speech with other social values. Thanks for joining Constitutional Foundations. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep defending the constitutional principles that protect our fundamental freedoms. Technical notes 4A.
All right, all right, all right. That was pretty okay. I liked it though. Um, Points for looking forward. I'm quite interested to see how federal regulations are going to start applying to platforms. I'm happy to see federal regulations applying to platforms. We've all had issues in the past, and especially in trying to understand an individual's place in a new landscape, a literal landscape that you can build out of nothing, build out of data, similar to building islands out of grains of sand one at a time, so that's literally what's happening in our government, in our economy, and it's already been happening in our lives, our society. How social media platforms are just deeply impacting how and what and who we interact with, how we interact, what we interact about. Very, very quickly, the internet, social media, searching, technology, ownership, copyright, all of these things have been a part of the anthropological machine that is American culture. That's one thing that differentiates our nation from other nations, where some of us may have originated from, some of us may have been born here. I think there's been a lot of talk that makes me uncomfortable about making America an ethno nation or something like that, an ethnic oriented nation, and that's not okay with me. What we're doing is antithesis to that idea, and technology supports that antithesis. Technology quite needs diversity of perspective, and also quite needs multimodal ways of communicating a perspective. So that's what the internet's doing for us, and it's been successful, and it's been gaining traction and solidity in our culture, but not without a cost. Some of us may have been caught up in like an internet firestorm, a debate over politics or a personal issue or a trigger. Some of us don't like the way culture is being performed on social media platforms like TikTok or Twitch. Even the ones that I don't have subscriptions to. I don't have subscriptions to anyone, by the way, except for YouTube. But even the ones that I would never have a subscription to, like 4chan or Trump Social, those are still building culture. Those are still cultural builders. Those are still cultural islands, and our humanity is congregating around points of culture and gathering spots, just like we always have. So I applaud the internet for that action. And since all of these cultural facets, all of these cultural areas are becoming more and more solid every day, and more obvious in how they impact our lives and influence what we think and how we live, I think it's a good thing to see a little bit more federal control over platforms. I don't think it's a good thing for safety reasons. I know, I'm one of those. I'm like, for the kids. I don't think it's a good thing for free speech, obviously. But if you've ever been in a room with let me come up with two examples here that are going to be quite obvious, so you know what I'm talking about, and also not offensive, but it can be offensive. Just let me know in the comments. Okay, if you've ever been in a room with a glam artist and also a fun conservative Making artistic glam and serving the fun. You know what I mean? If you've ever been in a room with a glam artist and a funservative who are both dedicated to free speech, you don't give a fuck what they're talking about. You just want them both to shut up. Whew. That's what I call equality. Yeah, and so that's where I believe that the regulations of digital media and platforms are actually going to benefit human society, because one of the things that this has been doing without regulation that is absolutely detrimental to our society and our democracy is fracturing conversations and conversation spaces. Like, ugh. If you've, oh my God, like, people go to the internet now instead of going to each other to talk to each other, you know? And I think they shouldn't do that. I think if you've got nasty, gross, rude ass opinions, don't hide behind a screen. Bring it to me. I'll talk to you on the sidewalk. I'll talk to you in the bar. I'll talk to you at an open mic. I don't perform, I heckle. Yeah. I make sure that these jerk off, not taking it seriously, cultural detractors who think they're fucking funny, who get up on 2 inches of plywood, actually do something beyond dead baby jokes and rape jokes. I've literally had to heckle those guys down, which makes me laugh. And I think it drives the culture forward. Be funnier. That's not funny. Let me know if you agree or disagree. And I'm happy to tell you more about those stories that I've heckled and had cultural moments of explosion in public, in person. So if you know me and you're watching this, give me a call. I'm not on any social media platforms. Oh, let me go ahead and play these tips for you before I forget while I go pet my dog.
Technical notes for AI voice reading. All case names written out phonetically where needed. Years spelled as 2023 rather than 2023 for natural speech. Complex legal terms followed by brief explanations. Natural speech rhythm with conversational transitions. Emphasis words marked with italics and original for AI voice stress patterns.
All right, that's it. Thanks. Bye. See you tomorrow. Oh my God, I'll see you tomorrow. I got stuff to do.